Marcus Aurelius wrote of turning inward to dig out the tumors of the soul, not to punish oneself, but to excise delusion. We amputate emotions, we label weakness, envy, grief, lust, then wonder why they return as specters in dreams, as outbursts at loved ones, as a hollow ache in stillness. A 2013 study in emotion found that suppressing negative feelings amplifies their physiological toll, racing hearts, clenched jaws, while granting them covert power over decisions. This is the 9th law of human nature by Robert Greene, the law of repression. A sailor who pretends the dark clouds are harmless is drowned by the wave. He refused. To name the Stoic path demands brutal honesty. What lives in your cellar? Chapter 1. The Shadow Within. Have you ever wondered why certain aspects of yourself remain hidden, even from your own conscious awareness? Why do you sometimes act in ways that contradict your self-image, as though another self emerges from the depths? We humans are masters of self-deception. We construct elaborate mental architectures to hide uncomfortable truths about ourselves, burying aspects we deem unacceptable beneath layers of denial. This is a fundamental human tendency to push disturbing elements of our nature into the shadows of consciousness. The psyche operates like an iceberg. What you consciously recognize as you represents merely the visible portion above the waterline. Beneath lurks a vast territory of impulses, desires, and tendencies that you've learned to disown. Jung called this the shadow, not because it is inherently evil, but because it exists in darkness, unacknowledged by the conscious mind. This shadow formation begins in childhood, as you encountered disapproval for certain behaviors or emotions. You learned to suppress them. The angry outburst that brought punishment, the sexual curiosity met with shame, the selfish impulse scolded by parents, all became candidates for repression. But what is repressed does not disappear. It merely goes underground. The Stoics understood this dynamic centuries before modern psychology. Epictetus taught that unexamined emotions control us precisely because we refuse to acknowledge. The first step toward freedom is recognition, bringing the shadow into consciousness, where it can be integrated rather than denied. Psychological research by Carl Jung and his followers demonstrated how repressed content manifests in projection, seeing in others what we deny in ourselves. The qualities that trigger intense reactions in you often reflect disowned aspects of your own nature. The path to wisdom begins not with cultivating virtues, but with acknowledging your wholeness, the acceptable and unacceptable alike. What you repress eventually distorts your perception and behavior, creating precisely the suffering you sought to avoid. Chapter 2. What part of you do you pretend doesn't exist? There's a stranger inside you, silent, alert, watching from behind your eyes. You don't talk about it. You barely let yourself feel it, but it's there. The part of you that resents, envies, fantasizes, the one that remembers every slight, imagines revenge, hungers for validation, but calls it confidence. You've wrapped this part in layers of routine and politeness, but it still breathes. This is the repressed one, not evil, not dangerous by nature, just unseen. And what is unseen grows in distortion. Psychology calls it the return of the repressed. What we push down does not die, it festers. It finds its way back through anxiety, impulsive decisions, harsh judgments toward others. Often, what you dislike most in others is a clue to what you've denied in yourself. Jung's shadow, those qualities we disown to preserve our self-image. But what we exile doesn't disappear, it waits. Stoicism doesn't offer comfort here, it offers clarity. To live with virtue, we must first live in truth. Not the truth we show others, the truth we hide from ourselves. In 1994, an ironic process theory showed that trying not to think about something only strengthens its hold. Don't think of a white bear, and it becomes the only thing on your mind. Likewise, when you push away certain thoughts or impulses, you end up orbiting them without realizing it. Modern society amplifies this tendency toward personification. Social media platforms reward carefully curated self-presentations while punishing vulnerability and complexity. The digital persona becomes increasingly divorced from the multidimensional human being behind the screen. Research by psychologist Sherry Turkle demonstrates how this presentation culture deepens our disconnection from authentic selfhood. The Stoic philosophers anticipated this predicament. Marcus Aurelius warned against concern with reputation, writing that the opinions of others should not dictate your sense of worth. What matters is not how you appear, but the integrity of your character and actions. External validation provides fleeting comfort at best. The persona paradox lies in its contradiction. Created for protection, it ultimately becomes a prison. The stronger your identification with your social mask, the more threatening any deviation from it becomes. You begin to fear your own spontaneity, creativity, and genuine emotional responses. The psyche demands expression of previously neglected qualities and potentials. Those who resist this call frequently experience intensifying symptoms, the repressed content finding indirect expression through physical and psychological disturbances. So, ask yourself, who are you when no one's looking? What desires do you pretend you've outgrown? What angers do you mask as indifference? These questions aren't comfortable, but they're necessary, because if you don't face the repressed, it will act for you, in words you didn't mean, in actions you can't explain. Chapter 3. Should you suppress your emotions? Have you ever watched your own silence swallow the truth? In the dim corridors of your mind, there lies a locked door labeled unacceptable feelings. Behind it hums the secret chorus of shame, regret, and desire. We build these doors to keep the noise out, but the music inside grows louder with every brick we lay. Imagine trying to tune out a violin's wail by shoving it into a closed case. Eventually the wood will splinter. Sound will pour into the room with greater force. This is the price of exile. When we banish parts of ourselves, our jealousy, our fears, our tender wounds, we pay the toll in late-night anxieties and restless dreams. In 2008, neuroscientist Jonathan Schooler demonstrated that people who suppressed their worries ended up thinking about them more. Boomerang of attention that always returns heavier than it departed. Suppression doesn't silence, it amplifies. Stoicism teaches not to muzzle our impressions, but to observe them without judgment. Ask yourself, what thought do I refuse to acknowledge? Notice how the act of rejection twists that thought into a sharper shape. In my own life, I found that each unspoken grief set off a quiet rebellion in my decisions, small betrayals against my own integrity. You plant a seed deep in darkness to protect it from frost, but if you bury it too far, it never sprouts. So must we bury our feelings at just the right depth to nurture growth rather than condemn. Hold your hidden storms in the light of awareness and watch the storm clouds disperse into rain that feeds your soul. Psychologist Robert Trivers proposed that self-deception evolved partly to make our deceptions of others more convincing. By repressing awareness of our less admirable qualities, we can present ourselves as their opposites with genuine conviction. Stoicism recognizes this pattern as a form of misplaced attention. Epictetus counseled, "If anyone tells you that a certain person speaks ill of you, do not make excuses about what is said of you, but answer, 'He was ignorant of my other faults, else he would not have mentioned these alone.'" This perspective shifts focus from external judgment to internal examination. The psychological mechanism of projection explains much about human conflict. Nations project their own imperial ambitions onto rivals. Religious groups project their own intolerance onto different faiths. Political factions project their own authoritarianism onto opponents. The hatred directed outward serves primarily to maintain internal psychological coherence. Recognition of projection offers a powerful path to self-knowledge. Your emotional reactions become a map to your disowned self. When someone evokes disproportionate emotional intensity, pause and consider, what might this mirror about me? The qualities that most disturb you in others often represent your greatest opportunity for integration and growth. The shadow, brought into consciousness, transforms from adversary to ally. What you can acknowledge, you can choose. What remains, repressed, controls you, without your knowledge or consent. Chapter 4. What are you afraid you might become? There's a figure that lingers at the edge of your self-image. Faint, shapeless, yet familiar. It isn't a stranger. It's a version of you that you fear the most. Maybe envious, manipulative, or weak, obsessive, or worse, toxic and cruel. You don't speak its name, but you feel its breath when you hesitate, when you lash out, when you pretend to be better than you are. This is the shadow self, not a monster, but the parts of you you've trained yourself not to see. Many spend their lives trying to outrun this version of themselves, unaware that by ignoring it, they are dragged by it. Suppression is not control, it's a deal struck in fear. The paradox is this: the more you deny it, the more influence it gains. The more you admit it, the less power it holds. In 2012, psychologist Daniel Wegner revisited his earlier work and confirmed that trying to control the self by suppressing thoughts often creates rebound effects. Your mind replays the very impulses you try to erase. The same goes for identity. The traits you're most ashamed of become the ones that subtly leak through your actions, disguised as self-righteousness or avoidance. Stoicism doesn't teach us to become pure. It teaches us to become real, not untouchable, but unshaken. Seneca knew well that virtue wasn't the absence of fault, but the strength to face your fault squarely. To say, yes, this too is within me, and I choose differently. So ask yourself, what version of you are you pretending doesn't exist? The tyrant, the coward, the addict, the liar. Bring it forward, name it, not to become it, but to own it, so it doesn't own you. The only power darkness has is the fear you grant it. Chapter 5. When did you start hiding? Think back, not just with memory, but with feeling. When did you first learn that certain emotions were dangerous? That some parts of you, too angry, too loud, too needy, too honest, had to be buried to stay safe, accepted, or loved? It wasn't a conscious choice. It was survival, and it worked. But only for a time. This is how the mask is born. The mask is not deceit, it's protection. We craft it in childhood and polish it in adulthood until we forget we're wearing it. It shows strength when we feel small, smiles when we want to scream, agrees when we ache to resist. And while it might win us belonging, it quietly costs us the truth of who we are. Psychologically, this is called false self theory, first explored by Donald Winnicott. When a child isn't allowed to express their authentic feelings without punishment or rejection, they construct a false identity to preserve the relationship. But the deeper the false self grows, the harder it becomes to feel anything real. This is not adaptation, it's soul erosion. Stoicism does not ask you to be emotionless. It asks for courage, the courage to live without illusion. If your entire sense of self is built on what others find acceptable, you become a prisoner of perception. Ask yourself, what parts of me have I silenced to be accepted? Whose approval did I fear so deeply that I fractured myself to earn it? Masks are useful for war, but peace demands that we remove them. There is no virtue in hiding, and there is no freedom in being loved only for the role you play. The truth will cost you the mask, but it will return your life. Chapter 6. Have you felt the chill of unspoken darkness? Beneath your composed surface are hidden currents pulling you toward something colder. When anger, envy, or pride are buried, they don't vanish, they mutate into darker forms. These repressed emotions can become the seeds of the dark triad: Machiavellian cunning, narcissistic vanity, and ruthless psychopathy. In 2010, trait researchers found that individuals high in dark triad traits often report greater emotional suppression in youth, proof that what we refuse to feel can transform into what we most fear in others. Zetas, that score above 80 on the dark triad scale, walk a razor's edge between outsider wit and outright toxicity. Zetas are aggressive version of Sigmas. We explained this scale in many Zeta videos. Without the mirror of Stoic reflection or the measured clarity of Sigma reasoning, Zetas risk becoming irrelevant, or worse, a corrosive force in society. Stoicism doesn't demand cold indifference. It demands honest engagement. Observe your impulses without submission. Name the envy that whispers in idle moments. Question the pride that lingers after a small victory. This is the forging of true strength, steel tempered in awareness, not ice hardened by neglect. Ask yourself, which impulse have I buried so deep it now commands me? Confront it with stoic courage or risk being consumed by the very darkness you sought to escape. How does repression forge your dark shadow? Have you noticed how what you refuse to admit in daylight takes shape in the dark? Every emotion you banish, envy, rage, pride, slips underground, gathering power. Imagine a pot left heating beneath a lid. What bubbles over is not what you saw in the pan, it's the pressure you ignored. Zetas who lack stoic self-reflection and Sigma's disciplined discernment believe they've mastered themselves. In truth, they've only locked their shadows in the basement, and those shadows have become the masters. Stoicism teaches us to face every impulse as it arises, to name the flicker of jealousy, to feel the sting of wounded pride, to question the whisper of entitlement. Sigma discernment then asks, how will I channel this energy, toward wisdom or toward cruelty? Without this double lens, repression mutates into a dark triad, the very traits that corrode relationships and undermine society. Ask yourself, which impulse have I exiled so thoroughly it now controls me? Shine the Stoic's lamp into that hidden chamber. Invite the Zeta's shadow into the open, not to cower, but to integrate. Only this alchemy, honest acknowledgement refined by rational choice, breaks the cycle of repression and prevents your dark self from becoming society's silent threat. Chapter 8. How Not to Acknowledge the Repressed Self. Do you ever sense that something else is making your choices for you? When repression is left unchecked for too long, it doesn't just influence you, it becomes you. The thoughts you avoided, the urges you denied, the pain you silenced, they gather in the corners of your psyche, studying you, and then one day, they act through you. A cruel remark, a manipulative move, a cold silence. You tell yourself you didn't mean it, but part of you did. This is the final consequence of the law of repression, possession, not by spirits, but by the forgotten parts of yourself you never learned to confront. In the Zeta who is turned fully dark, repression becomes identity. He no longer sees manipulation as a defense, it becomes a philosophy. He doesn't struggle with empathy, he discards it. The buried becomes the banner. Without stoic reflection and Sigma-level discernment, the Zeta mutates into something else entirely, a vessel for everything he once tried to control. A man ruled by the very shadows he thought he'd escaped. This is why repression isn't just a personal danger, it's a societal one. These figures may rise in status, but what they spread is erosion of trust, of values, of meaning. Repression is a private act, but it births public consequences. Ask yourself, what part of me am I still pretending doesn't exist? Because if you don't face it, you will one day act it out. And by then, it won't feel like a choice. It will feel natural, familiar, justified. But it won't be you, it'll be what you buried, and what grew strong in the dark while you weren't looking. Thanks for watching.